Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another session on ecosystem-based adaptation and mitigation. My name is Fred Pattison, and the session today will be on EbA implementation, focusing on cross-cutting issues and approaches. I will touch base and provide you some background on within the context on ecosystem-based management and the evolution towards EbA as a response to the impacts of climate change. And then I will look at the different approaches and features of EbA. I will touch on the process in selecting different EbA options as a continuation of the last session on the ESRAM. And then I will touch on two case studies focusing on Choiseul and the work we are doing here in Honiara in the Solomons. And then I will end by looking at some lessons learned and the importance of understanding the need for a contextualized approach to where you're working, and also some of the cross-cutting issues that is involved. The Pacific faces multiple threats, as we are all aware, from not only from climate change, but also from pollution and waste, unsustainable fishing, invasive species, coastal developments, mining and logging, land-based developments, but increasingly as well from emerging issues such as seabed mining that are continuing to threaten the Pacific environment. And I think it is within this context that I would like us to start for us to understand some of the concepts that I will be sharing with you. There are many strategies with different degrees of integration when it comes to managing our natural resources or even managing our environment. And it can go from very specific fisheries management approaches, for example, a cucumber management plan or a turtle management plan, to broad concepts of reach to reef or integrated coastal management that includes all the components of the different natural environment. And I'm sure that many of you in the Pacific are familiar with some of these concepts, especially since we live on islands. So fisheries management focuses on fisheries only. Sometimes it can be multiple type of targeted fishes or stocks. Marine protected area is a more broad approach to managing the natural environment, and all of you have heard of the ideas of MPAs with different forms of management approaches. Integrated forest management is a form of ecosystem approach as well. It considers all the different components of the forest, not only just the trees or specific species. Marine spatial planning is also a tool that has been used widely in the Pacific, and those slides gives you an example. And then there's the ecosystem-based management approach, which looks at the different ecosystems at a systemic level, and the implementation of these different management approaches that I've shared with you comes with a different degree of level of approach depending on what you want to focus on. But ecosystem-based management broadly looks and appreciates the connections between the different ecosystems and how one activity that is happening within the system can affect the other part. So if you have increased land-based activity that also threatens the coastal environment and subsequently affects the coral reefs and the species of the coral reefs. So So the idea of ecosystem-based management recognizes that interconnectivity and, and seeks to ensure that our management approaches consider the system as a whole. It also recognizes that there are diverse ecosystem services that exist, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that idea already from my last presentation that I've touched on, but also the other colleagues who have presented in the other sessions. The ecosystem management approach to climate change is now what we call EbA, and EbA looks at the vulnerability of ecosystem services and realizes that interventions could be done at the systemic level in order to influence the resilience of these ecosystems, not to climate change, but also to consider how we can manage them from human activities. And so EbA, the idea of EbA also has emerged, and increasingly it also now considers the importance of supporting livelihood and that the ecosystems are as good as the people that manage and look after them or exist within them. And so that gives you a broad understanding of how the concept of EbA evolve into the climate change arena. It is important to note as well that some of the key approaches and features of the ecosystem level of management approach becomes applicable when you are thinking about ecosystem-based adaptation approaches. And a number of key ones I will touch on is one, is that it is a holistic approach. It considers the whole ecosystem level. It also considers the both human and climate change impacts. And also it requires a full understanding of the natural the interconnectivity and the baseline. It also considers the cross-cutting issues around development, governance, broader environmental issues such as waste and pollution, development impacts, and also the livelihood. And recognize that the community are part of the solution in building the resilience of these natural ecosystems. It also reinforces the need for interventions to consider multiple experts. So you would have fisheries experts, you would have at some time you need some mangroves experts. The different levels of expertise are drawn upon in this context. Let me refresh your minds with my last presentation, which is on the SRAM process, and this slide gives you a summary for my last presentation on the foster process, and also the examples that I have provided and how the ecosystem is connected. When you are developing your EbA options, there is a number of considerations that you will need to take note of, and the first is you have to think about your approach and the scope and your focus, and sometimes based on our experience, Some of your interventions could be at policy level or for the community guidelines. And so they are not typical practical ecosystem kind of activity, but those policy and guidelines could reinforce the principles of EbA. Awareness and education, of course, is also part of it. And sometimes you need some technical and research. And then, of course, we have the on-ground demonstration implementation activities. The other consideration one has to take note is the scale and the cost and the time of intervention. So what is your geographic focus for intervention? And the costs involved needs to be considered. And importantly, the cross-cutting issues. And this is around what kind of expertise you need across the different fields, depending on your focus. You need to consider what is already happening on the ground that you can build on. The other projects or if you are focusing on a certain community, what is happening already that you can capitalize on. And then you can also, importantly, the governance and contextual issues, I think. And the Pacific, at the community level, we already have structured governance mechanisms. And so I would advise that we utilize those governance mechanisms around the chiefs or the church or the women's group or the youth to drive as partners or to drive some of the work that you want to do. It is important that you develop a set of criteria for your options that you want to develop. And this is just an example of a matrix that we have developed. As you can see on the screen, it looks at the benefit of implementation, and then we score them based on the quality of performance and measures, and then some of the considerations, the cost of implementing, the feasibility. I know that many of the interventions we have around the Pacific are project-based, so I need to take that into consideration. Your sustainability, and of course, as I've referred to, some of the existing. We've also done a number of prioritization exercise, and sometimes the degree of prioritization is subjective to your needs. And so the benefits, the cost, the feasibility, sustainability, you will need to consider based on how. And for example, the feasibility around land tenure is always a challenge. Access in terms of the cost of traveling to the site. Some of these things you will need to consider, and you need to score them and to come up with a viable option for you to implement. And this example provided here we also did a cost-effective analysis. Once you have a number of options, you want to subject them to the cost-effective analysis to ensure that you can come up with one or two priorities that you can implement in your project. I will go through two case studies, one for Tresol that we've worked on before, and the other for Honiara. So for Tresol, there was a vulnerability adaptation assessment that identified the need for coastal protection and the protection of water resources. And the project that we implemented at the time focuses on the Sesamulga Pirini water catchment. And the EbA options was water catchment management for long-term water security. Sometimes you have to be creative as well. So in this case, we work with the community to establish a watershed management reserve, you can speak. At the same time, we provided some storage facility for them in the short term to address issues of climate variability and rainfall. For Taro and Choiseul, we undertake some coastal protection related work in partnership with other climate change partners at the time, such as GIZ and the Ministry of Forest and UNDP, to do some coastal protection for the island. It's a highly vulnerable island, and the coastal environment is increasingly being eroded. So some of the coastal protection work is done to enhance or reduce the impact of coastal erosion. The case study 2 we did for the botanical garden is a bit different because it is an urban environment. Our focus was on terrestrial watershed. It's a major water source for the city, and so we invested in strengthening the governance mechanism and then implement and support some of the existing plans for the garden through the Ministry of Forestry. And so we established a multi-sector management committee. And also we formulated a management and business plan that will help them to drive and also secure resources for the garden. So these are the 2 case studies, and I hope that they provide you with good examples, as you can see, on ecosystem-based adaptation options. I will quickly go through some of the lessons learned, and then I should finish for today. The EbA intervention will need long-term indicators. And sometimes you have to think about activity-based indicators as well. Also important is that you need diverse expertise. So if in the forestry, you need forestry. In the water resource sector, you need some water experts. It is important also to use existing mechanisms and arrangement. Also increasingly you will need to set some benchmark on what your indicators are, so that you are able to report within a certain time frame your indicators. Although the measure of success in terms of ecosystem level can be difficult to quantify. It is also important to realize that building resilience is an ongoing process, and that also livelihood alternatives is an integral part of EbA intervention. And one of the key lessons we have learned is to use local experts and experience, engage with other partners, and develop partnerships in the process, just like any project that you would implement. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you.